Welcome. This episode will start our course in world history by addressing what is modern world history, looking at the ages of man, the cradles of civilization, and some other early ancient history as we kick the course off. You might want to reference your lecture notes to give you a sense of where we are and where we're going to be headed. We've already addressed the question, what is history? Why do we study it? And now we'll move on to the dividing of history into the three main ages of man as far as this course is concerned: the ancient, the medieval, and the modern. So, a common way to divide all of human history, because you have to find some way to make categories to make sense of human history. We could divide all of human history into one or two or 10 or 100 different categories. You could divide it by century. You can do all sorts of things. A very common way to divide it, first with the calendar, you might think of BC and AD, which we'll get to in just a moment. But another way to do it is into three categories of the ancient, the medieval, and the modern. And the most traditional way to divide the ancient world, ancient history, from medieval history is around the year 500 with the collapse of the Roman Empire. And the most common dividing line between the medieval and the modern period is the start of the middle of the Renaissance and the Reformation period. So you can see this demonstrated with closer to the actual dates, roughly the year 500, roughly the year 1500, and happening right alongside the Renaissance and the Reformation are the voyages of discovery in Columbus and the beginnings of globalization. That other way to divide history, it's also very common, is BC AD, before Christ, before the birth of Christ, and Anno Domini, AD, standing for the Latin Anno Domini, in the year of our Lord, post Jesus Christ. So that is the years 1 BC, and the following year is 1 AD. There is no year 0, and December the 31st of the year 1 BC, that year ends, and at January 1st, the year 1 AD begins. Though they did not call it that at the time, they had their own calendar. This is kind of a European Western Christian calendar that has been adopted and is the calendar we currently use. And many people outside of the Christian world also use that. And so there is a push among some books and historians to adopt using the same numbering system, but rather than referring to BC and AD, they refer to BCE, or before the Common Era, and then the period we live in being CE, the Common Era. So those are just other terms to be familiar with in this numbering system. So that idea that the ancient, the medieval, and the modern, using these large numbers of roughly the year 500 AD, roughly the year 1500 AD, what are those dividing lines? The fall of Rome separates the ancient and the medieval, and the Renaissance period separates the medieval, or the Middle Ages, from modern times. Moving along, we will look at a brief overview in this unit. We will look at ancient history with a brief survey. We will then move into a brief overview of some medieval history, and then we will look at the Renaissance. And for the remainder of this course, everything will be in the modern period, since this is a course on modern world history. Now, as I said, there are many different ways to categorize world history. We could have 2, BC and AD, BCE, CE. We could have 3, the ancient, medieval, and modern. You could have 4. You could have 10. You can divide history among each of its centuries. There are many different ways you could divide history, and there are many different ways you could define modern world history. In fact, when you hear that term, you probably think of modern history being the last 10 years or 50 years, not the last 500. But when you think of all of human history, we really consider the last 500 years to be in the modern era. So as we look at ancient history, we're going to focus on 3 things. And in this video, we will mainly cover some of the cradles of civilization, and we will set up the next video, which will cover ancient Greece. And then again, in future videos, we'll look at the medieval, modern, and into the Renaissance. When we talk about the origins of human civilization, we're looking roughly at the years 3,500 years BC until the year 500 BC, when we have more of the more of the classic ancient civilizations that you're maybe familiar with. And so we'll get to that. We've already spoken at length about BC and AD, so I don't feel the need to rehash that again. Early on, early humankind were hunter-gatherers, and the thing that maybe I always stress about early humanity is the intense focus on food and how simple survival was early mankind's biggest struggle. What separates these early hunter-gatherers, however, from a civilization? We believe that we live in a civilization, and you can make all sorts of possible lists of these categories, but here are a few. One is that a civilization or civilized people have developed agriculture. This means animal husbandry, this means farming, crops, and having a more stable source of food supply rather than being hunter-gatherers, people that have to follow herds and flocks, people that are simply gathering nuts, berries, and fruit from trees and crops that are growing on their own, but they're actually cultivating and growing them on their own with intentions. They have agriculture. Next, a civilization has specialists, people that are full-time, not farmers, people that are able to do other things beyond simply farming, people that can be teachers, priests, people that can be scholars and politicians and rulers and all these things, that everyone is not merely concerned with food and basic survival. You have a specialist culture. And speaking of culture, you have culture. You have art. You have, and it gets into learning and education and song and writing and not cave art, but pictorial art and sculpture. And those are characteristics of a culture rather than simple hunter-gatherer human beings. You often see religion, organized belief that supports that culture. You often see law with the concept of justice, fixed consequences, fixed rights that are codified into that society. So those are some generally agreed upon characteristics of a civilization. Where do some of these early civilizations that many of you are familiar with and have learned about in previous years, here are some of those classic early civilizations. The Fertile Crescent in the Middle East, stretching from the Nile River in Egypt to the Tigris and Euphrates rivers in Babylon, which is modern-day Iraq, and stretching through the Holy Land and Palestine. You also see the Yellow or Huanghe River Valley and the Yangtze River Valley in China, the Indus River in India. You see early civilizations in Peru and among the Mayans. So we can see that cradles of civilization popped up with those characteristics, with agriculture, with religion, law, culture, and specialists, grew up somewhat independently among these various places among the world. Next, let's begin with a introduction to the ancient Greeks, and that'll be the main topic of our video tomorrow. The ancient Greeks we're talking about on the Greek peninsula here, they are not one of the earliest cradles of civilization. And the Greeks are very famous for their semi-independent city-states. And this is a map that shows several of those different city-states, that an area that includes a town, maybe a few small towns, and the agricultural region surrounding it that largely supports kind of one major city. And then each of these city-states is largely independent of each other. And so the location of the ancient Greeks is in the Mediterranean Sea. It is a peninsula, it contains lots of islands, and you'll see from this picture as well, they actually set up several colonies on these islands, that many parts of Asia Minor, modern-day Turkey, were actually settled by some of the Greek city-states. And this will serve as an introduction to our talk on the Greeks tomorrow. And hopefully, we've had an overview of some ancient civilizations and an introduction to modern world history. Thanks for watching.